My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with Brown University professor and economist Mark Blyth. Mark, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fine. Very nice to talk to you, Drew.
Absolutely. Looking forward to getting into a conversation. So, to begin, how do you describe your career to anyone who may be unfamiliar with your work?
So, best way of thinking about this is the intro to my first book, which is called Great Transformations. Back in 1987, I'm sitting in a car with my father. And my father, although he was a working class guy, was a lifelong conservative voter. And this puzzled me because from any sort of projection of like where he was in the world and how he earned and all the rest of it, he should vote for the Labour Party. They'd give him more stuff, right? And I said, why not? Why do you never do this? And he proceeded to tell me the story about inflation and then how the government would try and spend more money and it would result in higher prices and he wouldn't be any better off and all this sort of stuff. And I was studying economics as an undergrad at that point in time, and he was basically regurgitating about 30 years of extremely contested macroeconomic theory. And the guy was a butcher from Dundee in Scotland. And I got really interested in how it is that these very fancy ideas kind of fall off the blackboard into political talk and then into everybody's talk. So how do we absorb these ideas? Which ones do we sort of glom onto? Which ones never work? Which ones always work? Hence why I did a book later about the idea of austerity. And, a large part of my work is basically being about sort of how the idea of economics influences politics.
Absolutely, off the blackboard into the real world. But now you are contributing to the blackboard. Specifically, you have a new book coming out. How do you best describe this upcoming project?
Well, good to put a plural on it because there's actually two of them. I'm on leave just now and I'm basically writing for a 12-month block. So I'm finishing a book just now with an economist from the World Bank on inflation because, why not? We live through the most recent period of inflation. And the argument we make in this book, which is called Inflation, A Guide for Users and Losers, is that the idea that everybody loses from this thing just simply isn't true. And a lot of what you read and a lot of what you hear people saying are particular narratives, particular understandings of inflation, which are really best thought of as, I don't want to pay the costs of this, so I'm going to figure out a way of describing it so that this group over here has to pay the costs, right? So think about an inflation argument like a wage price spiral. Well, we always talk about keeping down wages. Very few people talk about keeping down prices. Why is that? Because it's two parts of the same thing. So it's an attempt to basically think through inflation in the current moment and also to think through maybe we're moving into a world where we're going to have kind of structurally higher inflation going forward for lots of reasons. What does that look like? And what does that do to our understandings of pensions, retirement, all that sort of stuff? And the second book project is about what I call carbon politics. So I think the forthcoming US election in 2024 is the most important election in the history of the Republic. And I'm being quite serious. Because if you take away the Trump-Biden stuff, what you've really got is a struggle between two business models. One of them is the emergent green economy based around the IRA and the Democrats. And the other one is basically the functional business model of the Republican coalition. And here's what I mean by that. Start up in Alaska, go to North Dakota, go down through Oklahoma, Kansas, all the way to East Texas, kick right through Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, come back up to West Virginia. That's the core of the Republican coalition. They're prosperous. They do well. What is it that they do? Farms, fuel, food. In other words, carbon. So they're the carbon economy, and you have a bunch of people saying, we need to not have a carbon economy. This is going to basically define the next 10 to 15 years of where America goes. And it's also the kind of deep structure or the deep struggle in American politics. So get away from all the sort of the woke stuff and all the rest of it and the personalities. What we're really talking about here is a fight over assets and whose assets gain value and whose assets lose value.
You just made a good point about the noises and the personality. It seems like through your line of work, you have to be constantly glued to the world of global politics. So I wanted to ask, do you consider yourself to be a political junkie?
Oh, absolutely not. I think most politics is exactly what you just said, noise. If I miss what people in politics say for a week, I can come back and nothing much usually has changed. There's a great line from an old conservative politician called Macmillan, who was a prime minister in Britain in the 1950s, and someone asked him, what does he think the important things are? And he said, events, dear boy, events intrude. So big things in the world that change things, that's what's important. People talking, not so much. I tend to read one paper in the morning, which is the Financial Times, for the simple reason that you cannot lie to the global investor class consistently without them giving up on you and you have no business model. If you read any other media, they can lie to you all the time. That's part of their business model. So with that and a few other sources, I tend to ignore ignore most of the politics. I put it this.
Congratulations on being much mentally healthier than the most of us.
Well, it's a bit like how to manage social media. I mean, I have 50,000 followers on Twitter, and the secret to that is just don't reply to anyone. Just never look, don't look at the comments. You'll be fine.
Absolutely. You speak so often about the climate crisis and how it's evolved over the last few decades. And personally, I come from a generation who was raised on the idea that we would solve the climate crisis. And now it seems that my generation is extremely pessimistic about the issue. What is your take on it and how Gen Z is interacting with it?
From the point of view of a Gen Xer who then blames the boomers for not doing enough, and then you guys can blame us. I mean, there's a kind of intergenerational blame game that we can play with each other. I'm actually quite optimistic, to tell you the truth. At the end of the day, we're never going to completely eliminate the carbon economy. We just need to make it much more efficient and smaller. And in terms of sort of moving towards green energy supplies and all that sort of good stuff, we know what to do. I mean, 60% of the problem is simply decarbonize the electricity supply. It's not a challenge of we don't know how to do this. It's a challenge of investment. And, we're stepping it up. The IRA from the government side is one part of that. But what's more important is the private sector response to that in terms of the pledged investment that they've got going on. So I think that we're really beginning to move the needle. And I think that as my generation and the boomers move out and you guys move into our position, as a generation, you're much more attuned to the importance of this, and you will put more muscle into it than we've done. We will get there.
Absolutely. I'm going to enjoy my time now before the blame train eventually gets to the generation below me, and then it's my fault again. Yeah. Mark, you have had an excellent track record for geopolitical predictions. You predicted Trump's candidacy in 2016 through many of the same lenses you used for your book, Angrynomics. You predicted Brexit, and you successfully predicted Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Now, what other successful predictions are you proud of? And more importantly, what are some interesting predictions you have for 2024?
Don't put me on the spot then. What was Trump's candidacy? It was Trump's victory.
Oh, Trump's victory. Yes, Trump's victory.
Yeah, you can check it on YouTube. Anyway, what do I think's going on now? I think the really interesting one is how Ukraine's going to play out. Because if the Republicans get back in, particularly if they get congressional control along with the presidency, then I think that basically closes down. Ultimately, to be crude about it, you can imagine a story whereby, if you will, the carbon coalition here doesn't really want to get into a spat with the carbon coalition over there. Russia once being described as a gas station with nukes. So you can see that one will wind down. When that happens, Europe is never going to trust the United States again. NATO will fragment, if not become, very problematic under a second Trump administration. So I think that we're into, potentially, if the Republicans win, an era of extreme volatility and extreme change in what have been the basic geopolitical relationships we've seen for a long time. And exactly how that plays out, I'm not going to put a point prediction on it, but I think a simple way to think about it is this. If the United States turns against any type of green transition, then the notion that the Europeans will back the United States against China will become extremely problematic, particularly if Ukraine is, in a sense, wound down, if you will, from the American side, and they're left to clean up the mess. They will get much closer to China, and China may be the world's largest carbon state, but it's also the world's largest green state, and they make a lot of the stuff that you need to make this stuff. So if the United States is going to give up on making that stuff, which is what the IRA is all about, then the Europeans and China will get much closer together.
If I could put you on the spot for another prediction that I didn't send your way, in 2023, we are experiencing one of the most interesting AI booms imaginable. Do you have any predictions relating to the AI boom and global growth and change that may or may not come from it?
Well, it depends how real it is, right? I think there are 3 stories about AI, which I think are all plausible. So the first one is it's a stochastic parrot. In other words, it's just a super fast computer that's able to work certain algorithmic patterns and lay it out in such a way that it looks like it passes the Turing test, i.e. it sounds like a human. It's getting better at doing stuff over time. We don't really know why, but it's ultimately stochastic parrot. The second one is it's Skynet. And I'll give you an example of this. A bunch of computer scientists got a ChatGPT type bot and said to it, there's a robotic arm over there. We need you to take control of it. And it took a couple of hours and it did. So that's now like reaching out from the virtual world into the real world. Where does that go, right? And then there's another one on this, which is, it's the best of all possible things, and it's going to massively increase productivity. It's going to enable the green transition. It's going to basically change the way that we all relate to work. It's going to massively increase leisure. The problem is going to be, what do you do if you don't expect people to work 50 hours a week for their crust? You just don't need them to do it. How are you going to do that? Massive changes in labor markets, which potentially could be good if handled in the right way. I think all of those things are plausible, but I don't know which one's going to play out. If we're smart, it's the last one. If we're lucky, it's the first one. And if we're dumb, it's the bad one.
Well, I'm hoping that Skynet is nowhere in my future.
One would certainly hope not.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible interview. I really appreciate it.
That's great to talk to you.